But speaking of Raiders, franchise spotlight.
What?
You're talking about how you watched Raiders in the theater earlier.
That was like 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, speaking of Raiders. Man,
We're now
I'm great
moving
at
on to the
segues.
section of the show called Franchise Spotlight, where we break down a movie franchise in detail and talk about each film. And this week's franchise spotlight is on the Indiana Jones franchise, starting with Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yes. Good job, Ryan.
The segue was half there.
Yes. So I actually got the opportunity to see Raiders of the Lost Ark in a movie theater recently, like I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And, God, what a perfect movie. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I've been saying that a lot the past few weeks, but we keep picking bangers for these situations.
Bangers. Absolute bangers of movies.
Yes, and Raiders of the Lost Ark is just one of those movies, man, where it's pure cinematic magic every time. Like from the opening scene to, you don't even see his face, you just see his whip, his hat, he looks like a suave badass, and then he whips the guy's gun out of his hands and steps into the light, and it's sexy Harrison Ford. You're just like, dang, he's such a cool archaeologist, like what the hell? And then the moment things start going wrong, he becomes a regular dude, and he's just like flailing around, doesn't know what to do. And that's one thing that's really a testament to the whole franchise, but especially in Raiders, is when he's in his element, he's like this cool, unstoppable badass. But the moment he steps out of his comfort zone, he's like, yeah.
And anything bad happens, he's just like, oh, he like freaks out,
Yeah, it's so funny. And
we get a young Doc Ock in it.
Yes, in the opening, yes. Alfred Molina. Mm-hmm. Very, very young Doc Ock. And, God, I love that whole opening. The iconic, like when he's looking at the idol and he has the sandbag. Like it's such
very
fun stuff.
iconic
and it's
moment.
all visual storytelling, too. Like there's barely any lines in the first 15 minutes of that movie. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, as soon as he does all the hard work, it gets taken from him by his colleague and he has to go back to America. And then you get the great scene where the people come in and say, hey, the Nazis are trying to steal the Ark of the Covenant. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. And
then doesn't he, I believe he denies its existence, doesn't he? Like, he's like, it's not a real thing.
Well, no, like he believes it's a real thing, but he doesn't believe that it has power. He's just
That's
like,
what it was.
He's just like, I don't believe in any of that stuff, but it's a real artifact. And, my mentor, Abner Ravenwood, he would know where it is. I'm going to go, try to track him down. Mm-hmm. And then, you find out that, and I like how it never explicitly tells you in that scene of like, he just says we had a falling out. But and then you meet Marion, and you find out that they had a thing, and then it's implied like, oh, their falling out was he was probably banging his daughter, and then took off, and then they hated each other. But I love Marion Ravenwood. What an awesome character! Like it's introduced, and she's doing the drinking contest, and she's pretending she's out of it just so she can win all this money. And then, and you get that shot when Indiana Jones walks in and his shadow's on the wall and you just see the hat and he walks in.
Badass.
And she turns around, Indiana Jones, and just punches him in the face. I love the sound effects.
The cheesy, just old classic sound effects.
So awesome. It's something that this movie, that I guess people just forgot about. This movie is violent as hell.
Yeah, it really is.
And like, dude, like the end, the dude's face just like melts and like people's heads explode. It's so great. Yeah. But I wish Indiana Jones stayed violent. Like, we'll get to Temple of Doom. But I wish that they like,
so what's your favorite
violent
segment from this movie? Like, what's your favorite sequence or moment from this movie?
A couple things. I really quick want to point out the cinematography in this film is unbelievable. And like I was going to say, I love the shot when they're digging and it's just the silhouette shot of the sunset and them digging. But my favorite sequence is when they're Marion and Indiana Jones are escaping and they run into that plane and that big dude is going to go up against Indiana Jones. And like Indiana Jones is just trying to sneak into the cockpit and the dude sees him and Indiana's like, and he comes down and they start having this fight and Indiana Jones is getting his ass handed to him, but then he finally gets the upper hand. The dude's nose starts bleeding. You're like, yeah, and then he gets knocked on his ass and then just smiles and you see the plane propeller just coming at the dude and it just messes him up.
Oh, absolutely.
Such a great sequence. And just this film is, Spielberg directed the shit out of this movie. This movie is so well done. And it's like, it was a story by George Lucas. It's a Lucasfilm Productions. Like
which is a very fascinating story on how they wrote it.
Yeah. And really, really cool stuff there. And like there's even a location that's the same location from A New Hope.
Really?
With when R2-D2 gets captured by the Jawas, the scene where like Indiana Jones has the rocket launcher. He's like, I'm gonna blow up the Ark. Like it's the same location.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, really, really cool stuff. And I also love just the dynamic between Indiana Jones and Marion. There's this great scene where they're on a boat. almost trying to get away, and it's like the first like intimate moment that they have, and you get the great line when she goes, "You're getting too old to be doing this," and he says, "It's not the years, honey, it's the mileage," and they're sitting there, and he's like complaining that his whole body hurts, and she's trying to help him, and she's like, "Well, God damn it, where doesn't it hurt?" And he goes, "Right here," and he like is like being like a dick, and he points to his elbow. He's like, "Right here," and then she kisses his elbow, and he's like, "This isn't so bad either." And she just starts kissing him wherever he points. It's a cute little moment between them. But it really made me mad that like they didn't bring her back for like 2 and 3 because I love the Marion Ravenwood character. But they were trying to make Indiana Jones like the American James Bond, which we'll get into later.
Yeah.
But then you get the awesome sequence in the end when they open the Ark and he's just like, "Close your eyes," and then everyone.
Well, he screams. He doesn't say just close your eyes.
Close your eyes.
Bloody murder. He's yelling
and like
it.
people's heads are exploding, people are melting. It's the practical effects are insanely awesome.
Oh yeah.
God, Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the best fucking movies ever made. Oh, and real quick, the stunts in Raiders. Oh my God, the action choreography and scenes and the stunt work. Top tier stuff. Like the stunt when Indiana Jones on the front of the car and he's getting sucked under.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He just goes and like it's a real stunt man like underneath a car that lets go and then grabs and like gets dragged by a real vehicle. And it's like, Jesus Christ, we would never see this now.
It's nuts.
It's so awesome. The fight scenes are great.
I would definitely say like my favorite sequence would be whenever they're in the market and the guy comes up with a sword, like the iconic.
Yes.
And the real story behind that like made that scene what it is. But this guy's like looking for a fight, and Indy's just like pulls out his gun and
just
shoots him. Which like after watching the opening and like seeing how he's just like so over it, anytime he gets like screwed over or just something bad happens, he's just over it and wants to get out of it. And that's what happens. Something bad happens, and he just wants to get out of the situation, so he just shoots him. You know, as in typical Indy fashion. And I'm glad that Indiana Jones like has that moment because that moment is a staple on who he is.
Yeah. And it's funny because it wasn't even scripted. Harrison Ford just had really bad food poisoning. They were supposed to have a fight, and he had really bad food poisoning that day, and he was just like, "Can I just shoot him?" And Spielberg is like, "Well, yeah, that's a great idea." And they ended up doing it, and that's... I love Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's such a good movie. Seeing it on the big screen was so great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But moving on to the next one, we have Temple of Doom.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I'm going to say something kind of unpopular about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Go ahead. We love unpopular opinions here.
This movie is fucking awesome. I love Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
It's not as good as Raiders, and there are some things in the movie that I wish were not there. Kate Capshaw's entire character. Oh my God, she's so annoying. I hate her in this movie.
She just screams at everything.
She's awful. She's the worst. But I love that the approach to this movie was, we're going to make a movie that's just completely different from Raiders of the Lost Ark and just have it involve Indiana Jones and do it that way. And while the first Indiana Jones movie was much about like, Judaism and that sort of religion, this one's about Hinduism. And this movie's dark as hell. It scarred every child that ever lived who saw this movie. And when you watched Raiders and Indiana Jones as a kid, you felt like you were getting away with something because those movies are really violent and parents are just kind of like, whatever.
It's a fun adventure movie.
But Temple of Doom, quick backstory before we get into the actual movie. This movie is partially the reason why the PG-13 movie rating exists. Because at the time, you just had G, PG, and R. And then Temple of Doom came out, which is rated PG. And a lot of parents were mad because, a man just casually rips another man's heart out with his hand.
Yeah, as you do.
Like it's nothing. And it's traumatic and horrifying. And there's a bunch of other cool bloody scenes. And parents were arguably, or admittedly, a little upset about what happened. So they decided, well, let's create a new rating and fix that problem. And one of the first movies to come out with that rating was actually Red Dawn. But yeah, and even Spielberg's career after this, he started only using graphic violence for like serious things like Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, things of that nature. Because even Indiana Jones 3 isn't as violent, and they may have done another one that wasn't that violent. But I try not to acknowledge the existence of that one.
Yeah. But unfortunately, you're going to have to with Indy 5 coming out.
But getting into the specifics of the Temple of Doom, the opening scene, there's a great James Bond homage. Indiana Jones is wearing Sean Connery's tux with the little red flower, and it looks perfect. And opens with a musical number, and this, you're in Asia, and he's just sitting there. And he kidnaps Kate Capshaw because he accidentally drank poison, and they have the antidote. And you get this amazing sequence of him trying to escape. Then Short Round comes in. I love Short Round so much. No time for love, Dr. Jones.
No time for love.
I love him. And the the club that they're in is actually called Club Obi-Wan.
Oh, really?
Which is
I didn't clock that.
A funny little thing, yeah. And Dan Aykroyd plays the guy who gets him out. Randomly, he's in the movie for like 30 seconds.
Good for him.
Yeah, right? But then you get the one scene that I think is a bit too much, where they're in the plane and turns out the pilot and the co-pilot are working for the people he was trying to escape, so they jump off of the plane with parachutes, so they get into an inflatable boat and jump out and pull the boat, and they just fall and land, and they're fine.
Yeah.
A little bit of suspension of disbelief not working there, but, whatever. But then you get into the real meat of this film, and you get to where they get to this temple in India, or this little village, this really poor village, and a lot of these people are very poor, and clearly it's this really sad, something horrible's happened. And they take Indiana Jones and Kate Capshaw in Short Round, they feed them, and they start talking about, what's going on. And Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, talking to the main leader of the village, is told like, oh, they took this sacred stone that we love so much, and in our religion, it brings love and peace to our people, and ever since it's been taken, bad things have happened, and they stole all of our children, which you find out were used for slave labor. Like I said, this movie's dark.
Yeah,
this movie's dark as hell. But they're like, they kidnapped all of our children. They're using them as slaves, and they took this stone. So what I like about this movie is, while in the previous movie and the other ones, the mission is kind of brought to Indiana Jones, like, hey, let's go do this because you would like this. For this one, it's just this village guy saying, we'll make sure you can get out of our country if you please just help us. So yeah, part of him is doing it because he wants to get home, but part of it also, as the movie plays out, you're seeing that he just really wants to help. So it was kind of, not only does it can dig his archaeological bone of like, I get to find an artifact, but he just really wants to make sure these people are okay.
Yeah.
And so it was a real like deep character thing for Indiana Jones. And you have Kate Capshaw, who just won't shut the fuck up. But
screams at everything. Yep.
And then, you get some great stuff with him in Short Round up until this moment, and then you actually go to the India. And in one of my notes, what did I put in one of my notes for one of the negatives of Temple of Doom? It was just a little bullet point that says mild racism. And it's when they're eating at the table and everyone's kind of making fun of what the Indian people are eating, and it's like, this didn't age very well. But, it does help establish like that they're in like a land that they're not familiar with. And you get this great sequence when Kate Capshaw and Harrison Ford are clearly about to have sex, but they go to the opposite room and they're betting which one's going to break first and come in. But then Indiana Jones gets attacked. And he starts fighting this guy, and Kate Capshaw's like, wow, he's really not coming. What, like an asshole. And then he, like, throws the whip around the guy's neck and hangs him from the ceiling, and then goes in, is, like, breathing heavy and, like, looking around. She's like, oh, be gentle. And he's just, like, looking for people. And that's when you get to the scene where they find this underground, like, voodoo temple, and this dude's ripping dudes' hearts out. I'm talking directly to Kyler and Nick right now.
Okay.
For you guys who always try to make me mad about John Williams just does the same music over and over, the score for Temple of Doom is dark and depressing and has no trumpets, and it is horrifying, especially in that temple sequence when he's ripping the dude's heart out.
Yeah.
John Williams did that, and it sounds completely different and great. Fuck you guys.
Star Wars and Superman's the same.
Stop that. We're going to argue about that some other time. But, in Temple of Doom, they go and try to stop what's going on. They see the stone that they're supposed to grab. And so Indiana Jones goes in there, gets kidnapped, gets forced to drink blood, becomes evil Indiana Jones once he drinks the blood.
Super cheesy.
Short Round gets put into a slave camp and gets whipped by people. And there's this really heartbreaking scene when evil Indiana Jones is about to kill Kate Capshaw, like, as he's under, like, the Hindu spell. And Short Round runs up to Indiana Jones and is like, Indy, please don't. I love you. Don't do this. And he, like, hits Short Round.
Yeah, it's very sad.
It's very sad. Dude, it's dark as hell. And then Short Round grabs a torch, runs up to Indiana Jones and burns him in the stomach. And then he snaps out of it. And then they're about to kill Short Round. Then he goes, wait, he's mine. And then goes, grabs him, hangs him over the fire, and goes. And then guess what happens right there? The Raiders starts playing, and they turn around and just start beating the shit out of everyone.
As typical indie fashion.
Awesome. And I like this movie so different from Raiders. It's dark as hell. It explored a new type of religion. And it's actually a prequel. It takes place a year before Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was interesting. They really try to make Indiana Jones be James Bond in this movie, it worked for the most part, but they kind of abandoned that concept. But anyway, as the movie wraps up, you get the great boxcar sequence where it's like they're on a roller coaster and they're fighting each other, and it's great. And you get one of my favorite sequences in the movie when he's on the rope bridge and he just cuts it in half and they fall and he has to fight people and people are getting eaten by alligators at the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
The violence is crazy, awesome. But
definitely a much darker, different approach to Indiana Jones, which, changed kind of the future, at least for the next movie, on the direction they wanted to take.
Mm-hmm. And the movie being a prequel is both a positive and a negative for me. And the reason I say that is because in the positive part, it kind of does help character development of Indiana Jones, because while he's mostly the same guy that he is in Raiders, he is slightly different. And the way this movie draws out is you can tell that by the end of Temple of Doom, he is the person that he was in Raiders. Mm-hmm. So that journey was interesting to see how he was a slightly different person just a year before and kind of became the Indiana Jones that we know. He's not completely different, but just like subtle little things to help him become who he was. Mm-hmm. And also, where it's a bad thing is there are several scenes they want you to think Indiana Jones is going to die, but it's like, I've seen Raiders. He was there the whole time. Yeah. So it's like, it's wasted suspense because it's not suspenseful. And the thing that sucks is like if it's a true sequel and takes place after Raiders, there's a great sequence where after you see the dude rip a guy's heart out, he's fighting Indy at the end and then he puts his fingers over his heart. And so if you didn't know that like it was a prequel, you'd be like, oh, like for a second, like, oh God. Yeah. But like if you know that, then you know like, oh well, he's gonna be fine. So it kind of takes that out of it as well. But while I don't think it's a perfect movie like Raiders, and I think it does have some issues, I really like Temple of Doom, although for years, even growing up, it was known as the one that's not as good. Yeah. And I think it might just because the dark nature of the movie and the actual content or the stuff that happens in the film, not the overall quality of the film itself. But give me some of your thoughts on Temple of Doom, and I have one more thing to say about it before we go on, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I do like the darker approach, although I can say like growing up as a child, it scared the shit out of me. Yeah. And growing up, I absolutely loved Short Round. I thought he was absolutely hilarious. But that kind of ties into like the mild racism because he was very stereotypical and like it didn't really age well. Yeah. But still, for what it was looking at the time, I thought it was still enjoyable for the most part, but again, like thinking about it in today's day, like it's not something that aged well, and not just his character, but like a lot of other aspects as well. But definitely my favorite part of that movie is whenever Short Round like helps Indy snap back to it and holds him over, because I've always loved like heroic moments like that, especially with the score kicking in. Like that's why I love like a lot of the James Bond moments, because something will happen and then that theme will kick in. Like, and I absolutely love the Indiana Jones theme, the bum ba da bum. It's great. Like John it's Williams. Fantastic. Yeah. But it's just like it's super dark subject material. Like there's sacrifices, like you said, ripping people's hearts out, and then an annoying actress who just screams the whole time she's on screen, which is very annoying after the first scream. But it's just like slave labor. Like it's a completely different approach, and it's and there's some great underlying stuff too that I have in my notes and I almost forgot about, but I have in all caps dark as hell, which I thought was funny. Yeah. But there's also even some World War II commentary, because especially in the 80s, commentary against American action in World War II wasn't very popular. But you get some of Short Round's backstory and you find out that his parents were killed in Hiroshima. So Indy took him under his wing, and like that was almost like unheard of in the 80s. It was a movie, especially a big pop culture movie, saying like, we killed his parents, so I feel like I have to help him. Yeah. Which was interesting. And also the villains, one of his motives, the main villain's motives for, doing these ancient practices and, the voodoo and all that stuff is because British colonialism in India at the time. And he says, like, these British come in, they just think they can run everything. I'm not going to let it happen. And it was just like, oh, wow. Like, stuff that, as your kid, just goes over your head. And, I didn't mention it for the Raiders, but, like, I love that Indiana Jones hates snakes. Yeah. And in every single movie, there's at least one scene where something happens with a snake and he, like, freaks out. I hate snakes.
Yeah. And last thing about Temple of Doom before we move on. I've noticed something about Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, and doing research about it. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was the original Star Wars The Last Jedi. And what I mean by that is Raiders comes out, Force Awakens. Yep. Most people love it. Yay, little complaints. Great. Then they do the next one. And suddenly, especially with Last Jedi, but Indiana Jones at the time, if you look at the complaints, that doesn't even feel like an Indiana Jones movie. That was so different. What the hell was that? Blah, 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 blah. You know, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So in the third movie, they bring back characters from Raiders. They make it a similar story to Raiders. There's literally sequences taken from Raiders, and they kind of course-corrected the third movie into kind of bringing it back to making it more like Raiders because of audience response to the film.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the difference is Steven Spielberg made that choice, and George Lucas made that choice for Indiana Jones, where Disney made that choice for The Last Jedi to Rise of Skywalker. And I think Last Crusade is better than Temple of Doom. I don't like Rise of Skywalker over Last Jedi personally. But so obviously there's some differences there, but that's kind of subjective.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole idea of having a second installment come out, fans complain about it a lot and are very vocal about that. So they kind of take, because originally they were going to make it like James Bond. It was going to be a different random adventure each time.
Yeah.
And the original idea for Indiana Jones 3 was like a haunted house type of thing, like a haunted castle type of thing that they reworked and changed. But with that being said, I love Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, the third movie, which we're going to get into right now.
Yeah.
But I just...
That's an interesting, like...
Cinematic history tends to repeat itself.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just an interesting thing to point out, is that with the thing with The Last Jedi, it wasn't a... things like that have happened before.
Mm-hmm.
And like Temple of Doom, I think over the years people are going to look back at Last Jedi and appreciate it a little bit more.
Yeah.
I still think that movie has problems. You know, this is not a Star Wars conversation, but I just saw the parallel between those two things and thought that it was interesting.
Yeah, that is very fascinating to look at that and see how cinema history repeats itself, because that's a famous saying, history tends to repeat itself. And
exactly.
This is a prime example.
Exactly.
But like you said, The Last Crusade is up next.
Yes. Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. I'll let you go first on this one.
Okay. I will say one of my absolute favorite things about this movie is the Sean Connery, Harrison Ford dynamic, the father-son dynamic. Because Harrison Ford is just... he feels like he is rejected by his dad, right? Like he just doesn't...
Yeah. They don't click.
Yeah, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely love that dynamic grows as the movie goes on, up to the end where... Because he always calls him Junior.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's not my name.
Yeah.
It's not my name. And then at the end, he just kind of like accepts it because like they have this whole character arc between their relationship. And I absolutely love that. It's probably my favorite thing about that movie.
Yeah. And you find out that his name is Henry Jones Jr. for the first time. You got Indiana after the dog. Such a good moment.
Yeah.
But I thought some of the beginning of Last Crusade, other than the opening flashback, which I thought was great.
With River Phoenix. Yeah.
God, who did such a good job.
Yeah, rest in peace.
He was taken way too soon. But,
yeah, absolutely.
But I thought some of the opening after that initial sequence was kind of stale. But then the moment Sean Connery shows up, like Raiders, it's just pure cinematic magic all the way through. This might be Sean Connery's best performance. And he's James Bond. And I love him as James Bond. But like Sean Connery, amazing in this movie. He gets giddy over like the Holy Grail stuff. And they went from Judaism to Hinduism to Christianity. So it's like another religion tie-in. And, you know... the movie does a good job of presenting its facts and presenting its exposition. Like, I forgot to mention in Raiders, it has one of my favorite expositional scenes ever where someone's poisoned Indiana Jones's candy, and they're talking about where to find the Ark, and he's about to eat it and then stops to speak. So while you're getting exposition, you're also like, God, don't eat that. And it's a great scene. But Last Crusade also makes it fascinating because they have, at the heart of that story is the dynamic between Indiana Jones and his father. And while a lot of similarity between Last Crusade and Raiders of the Lost Ark, while it is similar in tone and similar in what's going on, the thing that makes it wholly different in a completely different dynamic working way is, like I said, the relationship between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford, and their chemistry is excellent.
Oh, yeah.
And it has the greatest transition shot in human history when he puts on the hat as a kid and dips down, and then when it comes back up, it's Harrison Ford. I love that. And this one does take place after Raiders. I believe it was 38 it takes in, and Raiders takes place in 36.
Yeah.
But yeah, love this movie. I love the girl in this movie, and then she turns out to be a Nazi, but I thought her performance was good. And I love the bit with Sean Connery. It's like she talks in her sleep. And Indiana just like, I love the bit where they're tied back to back and like the house starts to burn, so they're trying to like,
and they're like arguing and fighting about like petty stuff too as well.
So good.
Yeah.
I will say this is the funniest Indiana Jones movie. The humor works.
I'd say
Raiders has some good jokes, but like this is the most consistently funny, but it also moves forward with its action like continually. Like it doesn't sacrifice one for the other.
Yeah.
Because this has some great sequences in it as well. There's a great tank scene where it's like coming up against a wall,
which
is Indy's holding on to it. Yeah, it's such a great.
It gives me anxiety every time I watch it, even though I know the outcome of it.
Yeah.
But like, it's just like, oh my god, like you got like, because his bag is strapped to the turret part, and he just can't get off of it, and it's done so well.
Yeah, it's great, and I love that it finally addresses him being a professor, and like. Because he goes into his office hours and there's all these kids like Professor Jones, blah, 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 and he's like, one at a time, and he like goes into his office.
Because usually we're just with him for his adventures.
Yeah, and then he goes into his office and just sneaks out the window. Like it's just fun little shit like that. It has two of my favorite movie jokes ever.
Okay.
And one of them is the joke about Marcus Brody who returns from Raiders, where they're like, we're going to find Marcus Brody. And then Harrison Ford does like this passionate speech. The camera's moving in on him. And he's like, Marcus Brody's one of the most intelligent men I've ever known. He can easily disappear. He knows 6 languages, can do this and do that. You'll never find him. With any luck, he's found the Holy Grail already. Then it cuts to Marcus Brody in Egypt. And he's like, does anybody here speak English? And it's so damn funny. Such a great moment. And also there's a scene where they're in a plane. Sean Connery and Indiana Jones. Sean Connery, Harrison Ford. Christ.
Yeah.
And Sean Connery is shooting at enemy planes, and then he completely shoots their own plane and like takes off the back of it. And then he pauses and just goes, son, I'm sorry. They got us. Just like plays it off like they got hit.
Yeah.
It's such a great scene. And the chase sequences are so thrilling. The no ticket joke is also great. When Harrison Ford puts on the disguise as like the ticket guy in the Zeppelin and throws the Nazi out the window, and everyone looks by and he just goes, no ticket. And then everyone like pulls out their stuff like so funny. You get great scenes with Sean Connery and Harrison Ford, like when Harrison Ford's like, you never talked to me as a kid. And then so Sean Connery's like, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
He goes, well, I don't know what to talk about now. And then Sean Connery's like, well, what are you complaining about then?
Yeah.
And I think the emotional crux of the movie. And I love this film's third act when Indy has to go and complete the challenges to get the Holy Grail, because Sean Connery gets shot, and so not only are there there's real stakes to like, I have to get this or else my father's gonna die. So it's more personal rather than just adventurous. And I love the scene when the Grail crosses the seal, so the temple starts to collapse. And Indiana Jones is hanging off the cliff. His dad's got his arm, and he's like reaching for the Grail, like I can get it. And for the first time in the movie, his dad goes, Indiana, and just calls him the name he's always wanted to be called. And then he just like looks up and knows like, okay, I need to let it go. Like that's such a great moment in that movie. And it's the emotional crux. And do you have any negatives or in particular about the film?
Negatives? No, I don't think it's like a perfect movie by any means. But I couldn't point like a negative out. But one thing that I absolutely love that ties into the relationship and the emotional of the relationship between them is whenever the tank like goes off the cliff and they think that Indy was on it, which he was able to hold on to the cliff, but they're all like looking over and they're like crying and like upset that like Indy's dead. And then he like gets up, but he's like 10 feet away, so they don't see him, and he like comes over their shoulder and like looks over to see what they're looking at. And it's just, I love that moment.
And Sean Connery hugs him and says, I thought I lost you, boy.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. So good.
The only negative I have, other than like I thought part of it was stale, and it tries very hard to forget Temple of Doom, but well,
in what ways?
It's just they reference Raiders of the Lost Ark a couple times, and they don't even mention anything about
Do you
Temple
think that's
of Doom.
Also taking it in a different direction, that they wanted to like stray away from Temple of Doom and like any connection to that?
I think so.
Like on a filmmaking standpoint, not necessarily like in the movie?
I think so. Okay. Maybe. But it was just kind of like you expect something and nothing. And also I love that they kind of hit it on the head of like they want Indiana Jones to be like James Bond, so they cast James Bond as his dad. Like that's not a negative, that's just cool. But my last negative is I hate the cliche of don't trust anyone, and the person who said don't trust anyone is the bad guy.
Yeah. And
like as a kid, I'm sure I didn't see it coming, but like I've seen so many movies now. When I rewatched it, I like as soon as the guy said like don't trust anybody, I was like, fuck, that's right. He's the bad guy. And I hate that cliche. But a little, it's nothing major to dislike about the film. But and then at the end of the movie, you find out his real name. You find out he got his name from his dog. Him and his dad are happy, and then they ride into the sunset. And they never made another Indiana Jones movie again.
Until 2008's Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
I also have notes.
Probably a lot of negatives, I'd imagine. Well, let me go ahead first, because my talk will be short before you get into your negatives and rip it apart.
Go ahead.
I will say this movie is absolute trash. Now, I do remember watching this as a child and enjoying it because it's fun as hell for kids, but like anyone who's our age or at least has any concept of like film is they're not gonna like this movie. It's trash. There's aliens in it because fucking what else is gonna happen?
They're interdimensional beings, Ryan. They're not aliens.
Whatever, same thing. God, Nazis are back being the villain again because
it's not. It's Soviets.
Soviets.
They even drive by a college like protest that says I'd rather be dead than red.
That's what it is. Yeah. God, how could I forget? I try to block that movie out of my memory. But it's I will say my favorite part about this film is definitely when they're in the warehouse and he's like running and whipping the lights.
The opening is awesome.
Absolutely.
The opening is awesome.
It's fantastic. But aside from that, there's really no positive. Shia LaBeouf's character I absolutely despise. I think he's just super annoying. But Harrison Ford does. Huh?
Mutt Williams.
Yeah. God, it's so bad. It's awful. And Harrison Ford, you can tell, clearly doesn't want to be a part of this movie at all.
One of my notes is Grumpy Harrison.
And, like, Harrison Ford is one of the funniest actors to watch because you can tell when he cares.
Yeah.
And you can tell when he absolutely doesn't.
He cared more about Call of the Wild.
He absolutely did. And I don't blame him at all.
Oh, God. But anyway, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
But no, you're good. That's probably the only positive I have about this film is the opening sequence because I think that's rad as hell and that is Indiana Jones. But the rest of it, like the CG is horrible. The chase sequence at the end with the giant killer ants, it's so bad. It's so bad, and it feels like it's trying to be formulaic, and I think that's its biggest downfall. It's not trying to be its own movie, and with aliens or interdimensional beings, like it's stupid. I try to forget that it even exists, but it does, and they're gonna make a fifth one, so this one is in that universe.
Yeah. I'll believe the fifth one when I see it.
Yeah,
but I'll do my positives first. I really like the opening scene as well.
Wow.
Very cool. The entrance of Indiana Jones as a character, awesome. Mm-hmm. Cate Blanchett plays the villain, and she tries very hard. She's giving like a stereotypical Russian performance, but she's killing it at doing that.
Yeah.
I like Cate Blanchett a lot. They tried to add more to the story by firing Indiana Jones as a professor, even though they undo that decision at the end of the movie, so it doesn't matter. And Marion was back. Marion Ravenwood returns, breaking the tradition of having it be a new girl. Finally, Indiana Jones isn't James Bond. I love Indiana Jones. I like him more than James Bond, but try not to be James Bond. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So I'm glad that they broke that tradition. And then let's go to my negative, shall we?
Oh boy.
Grumpy Harrison has been brought up. Now, there are a couple moments where he's Indiana Jones.
Especially during that opening.
Yes. And like the snake part, he becomes Indiana Jones again. And there's a couple scenes where he is. But for the most part, he's just...
Yeah.
Nuketown.
Oh my God.
Did you remember that?
Yeah, that is the scene I try to forget.
When TV does something bad, it's called jumping the shark. With this movie, whenever a movie does something dumb, it's called nuking the fridge. Because that's exactly what happened. He got into a fridge and survived the nuke. That's more suspension of disbelief than Temple of Doom falling out of the plane.
Yeah.
They do a really bad job at the suspension of disbelief in this movie, which they do a great job of it in the previous films. It feels like a movie without a soul.
Yeah.
Like Indiana Jones, every movie, even Temple of Doom, which is different, you feel that soul and that passion in that movie. The movie just feels very stale, very bland, very CG heavy, and it just takes the magic right out of an Indiana Jones film.
Yeah.
And having the sort of MacGuffin be sort of extraterrestrial in a way, it takes away from the grounded magic of the story. It just feels dead inside. It felt like a movie with a hollow shell. It didn't even feel like a Steven Spielberg movie, you know? God, movie makes me sad every time I watch it.
It honestly feels like just movie executives who are like, you know what people love? Indiana Jones. And you know what people love even more? Revisiting a franchise years later. Let's go ahead and make a movie to make money.
Yeah.
And that's what their sole intention is what it feels like, is to make money.
Yeah, and also, remember the Tomb Ninjas?
Yeah.
That came out of nowhere, then disappeared for the rest of the movie.
Yeah. Fascinating idea.
Yeah.
But,
and like the whole thing with Indiana Jones and his son did not work.
No.
And the reason
And
is
they try to play. It feels like they try to play it like the Sean Connery one.
but the thing is, the heart and emotional crux of Last Crusade was him and his father.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even find out it's his son till halfway through the movie, and then you don't have time to have like the bickering thing with that. It just felt very stale and weird. Felt shoehorned. And when you look at the original idea that he wasn't supposed to be his son, it's supposed to be a random character, which the movie works much better if that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana Jones got married at the end. Good for him. I mean, I don't see that as necessarily a con, but I'm so glad that, because like they do this thing where the fedora blows into the wedding chapel and Shia LaBeouf picks it up and he goes to put it on as if being like, here's the next chapter of Indiana Jones, and Harrison Ford just takes it and puts it on, and it's like they covered themselves there, because I don't know if you know this, but in the press junkets for this movie, Shia LaBeouf just shit on it. Like while,
Did he really?
Like while it was coming out, he was just like, yeah, this movie isn't very good.
Wow.
And before the movie came out, the producer of the film said, one of them might have been Frank Marshall, said, if we do a fifth Indiana Jones film, Shia LaBeouf will not be a part of it. It was just like, damn.
Yeah.
So you got to give him for the balls, but
at least that's one confirmation we have about Indy 5.
Yeah, right. And the Soviet psychological warfare that they try was very out of place and weird. The movie is very just
all over the place.
Yeah, it's too much, and the script isn't as tight. Like it felt like they were trying, because like in the other movies, they know the thing they're looking for, but it's written in that they have a piece they have to find before finding the thing.
Yeah.
Well, in this movie, they're like, oh, let's find the thing. It's not here, but here's a clue. Let's find the thing. It's not here, but here's a clue. And it's like, no, damn it. It's so annoying.
Even if they were to do that, they would have to have some sort of like feeling like, oh, here's another clue, but here's a very important piece of the movie that you need to know. Yeah. Oh, here's another clue, but here's also something else that's really cool about a character that you don't know yet, but like... Like, if they did something rewarding like that.
Whereas, like, for Last Crusade, for example, it happens in Raiders and Temple, too, but for Last Crusade, there's a sequence where they have part of a stone tablet that, like... So, big goal, find the Holy Grail. Little goal, find the rest of this tablet, because we can't find the Grail without this tablet.
Yeah.
So, when they go to find the tablet, they find the Knight Shield that has the inscription. So, it's like, oh, they found the thing they were searching for. They didn't go and find a piece of paper that says, haha, it's not here, but you'll find it over here. And then they go and waste
like,
more
hey,
time.
This Knight Shield has this logo.
Yeah, but, like, it's... Yeah. They naturally do it better, because they have an overall goal and a little goal, rather than just being tugged around the whole movie, like this one. Not a very good movie.
No,
it's really heartbreaking, because the original 3 is one of the best trilogies of all time, but then they made the 4th one. Although I'm looking forward to see what James Mangold does with number 5.
If he stays attached.
If it happens. Harrison Ford's also 80, so I'm really like, what is this movie gonna be? You know,
yeah.
I'm really curious about it.
We'll see. But one thing I did want to touch back on is, like, I'm a firm believer in that practical effects look much better and pulls you into the movie better than CG. CG is necessary when it's needed. Yeah. But, like, for example, whenever Shia LaBeouf is swinging on the ropes, it pulls me right out of the movie.
Or when he's like standing in between the two cars and like the weeds are
hitting him. Like it just takes me out of the movie. Now, if they were actually to do that and like have a stunt double, but like put Shia LaBeouf's face on him, then I'd be like, oh my god, like that feels real.
Or even use CG just to enhance scenes, because like, even like they didn't have CG at the time, but the original trilogy has special effects, but they used it to just like enhance something, and it's for a second, it's quick, it's not, you know, then most of it's practical. That was part of the magic of those movies.
Exactly. And then going back to Last Crusade, like with the whole tank thing, that's a real rock and a real turret that he's on, and he could get crushed, which obviously he's not going to. But it's just the fact that it is real.
There's a stunt where he's on a horse and jumps from the horse to the tank.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they were going 20 miles an hour, but still.
It's the fact of the matter that they practically did it, which brings you into the movie better than this CGI mess.
Yeah. So what are you gonna rate each movie in this franchise?
Oh god. So I would want to say Raiders of the Lost Ark, 5 stars out of 5. Fantastic movie. Don't really have any negatives that I could think of, and probably will never have a negative about it. So do you want me to rank them from worst to best?
No, just in order.
Okay.
And then rank them at the end.
Okay. So Temple of Doom, I'd have to say 3.5 stars. I think it's enjoyable. It's scary. It's dark as hell. I'm glad that they took the different approach to it. Last Crusade, probably 3.5 stars as well. And Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, probably 1 star. And that's just me being generous because I know.
1 star.
Yeah, it's horrible. I don't like it. And then from worst to best, obviously, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is down here. Then we have Temple of Doom. In front of that is
Last Crusade.
Last Crusade. Thank you. And then obviously Raiders being the best.
Yeah.
What about you?
My ranking is the same as yours, like
Okay.
the worst to best ranking. But Raiders of the Lost Ark gets an A+.
Okay.
Obviously.
Naturally.
Love it. To me, it's my second favorite Spielberg movie. So
Okay. Oh, wow.
like Jaws and then Raiders.
Wow. Okay.
Temple of Doom gets an A-. It would have gotten a higher grade if Kate Capshaw wasn't in it. Like, that's how annoying she is. Last Crusade gets an A. And Kingdom of the Crystal Skull gets a C-.
Wow. Very generous with that grade.
Just because the opening scene, I legit felt like I was watching Indiana Jones. And then it just
For 5 minutes,
slowly gets worse. And then there are some, like, here and there moments, like,
Yeah.
But then overall, it's not good. It's pretty bad. But I rank them last, Kingdom, then Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, Raiders. But it's like, this is the bottom. This is not the top. Kingdom, Temple, Last Crusade, Raiders.
Yeah.
So
there's a giant gap.
But yeah. Oh, there was actually one thing that Hannah wanted to add about Indiana Jones, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hannah! There was that one thing you wanted to say about Indiana Jones?
Hi. I'd just like to say that Harrison Ford is hot as hell in every movie, and I'm obsessed with him. Thank you so much.
No arguments.
Yeah.
That is a very, very, very beautiful man.
Especially Temple of Doom. Good stuff.
He
Good
sure
stuff.
listened to a lot of it.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I just figured that would be a good perspective to throw in there.
Yeah.